Welcome, listeners, to Cortex and Coffee Cast Season 2, Episode 9. I'm your host, Pete Steele.
I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks.
And we are hoping through this episode to kind of tear down the walls of getting into role-playing games. Specifically, we're going to try and decipher alignment and what that actually means in different role-playing games. And hopefully we can bring new people into that particular part of the hobby.
Absolutely. And we're going to push back hard against the stereotype that board gamers and nerds are asocial beings. This is actually one of those good things to talk about because alignment ends up being a very social construct.
As always, we do want to thank our behind-the-scenes people, most notably our producer, Keegan King. He is, like, chaotic. I don't know. It's not even a true alignment, but that's who and how he is. So,
yeah.
What do we actually do in this episode, Rick?
So more specifically, we're going to talk about how alignment has classically been handled in role-playing games. We're going to talk about some of the good purposes that the treatment that it's getting right now is serving. And we're going to talk about some of the common pitfalls that give people trouble. We're also going to talk about our take on how you get some of these same benefits of using the shorthand of alignment without being tied down to a structure that's too rigid to play around with.
When we mean alignment, right, people who are familiar with role-playing games already know this. People who aren't as familiar will not know this. What we're really talking about is your character's worldview, their moral code, what ethical codes they might buy into versus those who are just going to shun based on their own value system. And different role-playing game systems have kind of codified this in different ways. So alignments have been in role-playing games for a long time. In 1974, the brand spanking new Dungeons & Dragons had lawful, neutral, and chaotic, while the second edition, released in 1989, added good and evil on a second axis. With D&D 4th edition, attempted to simplify by putting all of these alignments on one axis.
A little bit of a mess, that one, but you know.
A little bit of a mess. What are they doing in 5th edition now with alignments? Do you know?
I'm pretty sure they went back to the grid.
That's what I think. I think they did that too. It's been a while since I've played 5e for D&D. But you'll find similar alignment systems in Pathfinder, in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplayer, in many others as well. I mean, Dungeons & Dragons is by far the most widely known tabletop RPG. Most RPG folks have at least heard of alignment, which really kind of makes it an essential part of tabletop gaming literacy, which is why one of the reasons why we're talking about it.
Absolutely. This is not a term you're going to be able to avoid. We're role-playing in a world that is as vast and fantastical as our imaginations. And here in this world, there live a vast host of characters. Each one of them has their own set of beliefs and values. These are like real people with mothers and pet peeves and childhood crushes. We could spend an entire week discussing the internal life of each one of these people.
I mean, that is a thing we could do, but it might make it difficult to finish stealing the ship and getting any pirating done.
Right you are. In most RPGs, the thoughts of your background characters don't really affect the story all that much.
Until that beautiful twist where they really, really do.
Oh, yeah. Good times. But most of the time we want to abstract these inner lives a little bit so we don't have to talk about them for weeks. And this is where alignments come in.
So when we're talking about the alignment axis, think about a compass, north, south, east, west, right? And at each of those points, you have a term. So let's just say north is, on the compass, is lawful. And on the southern point of the compass, you'd have chaotic. And this is a continuum, right?
Right.
And on the east-west, on, let's say east, you have good, and on west, you have evil. And so what you have is a grid, right?
Right.
And you can put your character at any point on that grid, and, so it's kind of this spectrum continuum. At the same time, most role-playing games that use this axis system kind of make it an all-or-nothing sort of thing. And we're going to get into how that kind of puts characters in a straitjacket and players in a straitjacket. But before we get into that, we're actually going to kind of lay out what each of the kind of codified 9 alignments based on this axis system mean and give you examples of them. So, without further ado.
So we're going to start off with lawful good. Now, a lawful good character is good. And good in this context means that they respect other sapient beings and they'll help out if they can, even if it costs them something. To be lawful good, you also have to be lawful, which means you have to follow laws and contribute to systems which are inconvenient for your character. You have to pay taxes even when you don't want to, etc. And lawful characters do this, well, lawful good characters do this because systems are a good way of taking care of people in their minds. Even in places where the law of the land is evil, a lawful good character will focus on working openly and changing those systems for the better. So if you're thinking in pop culture, you might think of Superman, very lawful good, or Captain America, very Boy Scouty, follow the rules types.
And following the rules for the sake of following the rules because they believe that the rules, when followed properly, do the best good for pretty much everybody. They don't always see the exceptions.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. They trust the system more than they trust individual situations.
Right. So I remember I was playing D&D 4th edition at my brother's house a number of years ago. This is like 2013, 2014, almost a decade ago. And Rick, I think you were actually the dungeon master for this campaign.
Oh yeah, I remember this campaign. That was the one with the sleep dragon and the wholly unnecessary recreation of residuum.
Yeah, I don't know what any of that, I don't know what that means. I don't remember any of that. All I remember is that we were playing D&D with some of my brother's old college buddies. I found out, like, either from you or from him that this game was going on, and I wanted in, and I said, yeah, come on, join the game. And I wanted to, play a rogue who kisses the prince or princess, steals the key, loots the vault, sells the town out to a dragon, and then at the last minute swoops in and bribes the dragon with the gold that I stole from the town vault, and, be the savior of the land. And everybody else...
Yeah, Riley was wild.
Riley, well, you say wild, I say, just doing his thing. Yeah, I was Riley the rogue. Everyone else in this game, including you, judged me for my character. I just remember, every other player in this game was playing a paladin, a lawful good paladin or some nonsense. And they would just turn to me, the players would turn to me and go, why would your character do that? And I would, explain my character's motivations. And they just look at me some more, like the players, and they'd be like, are you a bad person? I'm like, dude, we're not at that stage in our relationship. Yeah, I'm not going to just tell you stuff like that. And by the way, we're playing a fantasy game, let me live my life. It's a game, play the game. You'll know if I'm a bad person if I set your coat on fire before the evening's out. Completely unrelated to that, just don't go check on your coat right now.
Yeah, give it a good 5-10 minutes. What is that? That thing's polyester? Yeah, 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Also, as another complete aside, I have to go.
So, for a certain type of player, lawful good is just the default. Obviously, I'm going to do the right thing. Obviously, I'm going to follow the rules. And obviously, I'm going to save the day. Fortunately, most storytellers therefore have a lot of practice with disrupting the narrative of lawful good, especially as campaigns near their end and hard choices start needing to be made. I find that more and more people run into situations where systems and rules fail. The bad guy's a noble and you're not, so you're going to be sneaky, or you're going to walk away, or you're going to go to jail. Those are the choices. There isn't really an option to follow the rules, not rock the boat, and save the day.
Are we talking about Dungeons and Dragons or United States politics right now?
Very pointedly not talking about United States politics.
Yeah, so this is a safe, curated space. All right.
Yes. Whatever you take from this is up to you. There may be some magical shining reality where the paladin pushes through and stays true to himself, risks it all, and miraculously powers through openly to victory. But most people wind up moving to a more sensible alignment to try and get things done.
Yeah, I think so often that lawful good characters who truly want to stay lawful good are just kind of looking for a Disney movie ending, which is fine, but it's not great storytelling. 9 times out of 10. I'm not saying there's no room for it.
So I mean, here's the thing. In a role-playing game, as a dungeon master, you want to challenge your players. And you want to challenge them with combat encounters, yes, but you also want to challenge them by giving their beliefs a rock. If you just traipse down along the path that you're on, and that leads without any struggle to sunshine and rainbows, that's not great storytelling. If you are forced to either reevaluate the way you think or stick with it, and it costs you something, that's much more satisfying.
I think my big issue, and I'm kind of cherry picking here, I freely admit that, but my big issue with the lawful good alignment is it comes across to me as very racist and very speciesist in most campaigns. And specifically, you know, when you have an adventuring party and you go find the goblins who are like raiding whatever, and you know, the lawful good paladin has no issue killing all of the goblins. It's like, oh, they're goblins, they're monsters. But when it comes to some sort of human opponent, it's like, okay, let's kill these guys. The lawful good paladin very often be like, oh no, we can't kill them. Killing people is wrong. And I'm like, whoa, hey, like killing humans is wrong, you mean? Like how speciesist are you?
Right. Yeah. And that really comes into a problem, especially with more stereotypical fantasy worlds, because you do have to ask the question, what were the goblins supposed to do?
Right.
Oh, yeah, they're at the edges of human society and, like, stealing cattle or whatever. But, like, what are they supposed to do? If they opened a shop, would you shop there?
Exactly. And even if they are stealing cattle, slaughtering a whole tribe of goblins may be an overreaction. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely tricky, and if you're not at least being asked some of these questions, I don't think you're really engaging with the alignment.
And I like I said, I'm cherry picking. I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too by picking on lawful good characters while trying to justify kissing the princess to steal the key, to loot the vault, to burn down the village, to save the village. And, you know, like, it's a lot of work. Let's talk about the neutral good alignment. Neutral good characters don't care about the law as such. They generally follow it because following the law is easier and safer than flaunting it. But if this guy is late to work, he speeds a little. A neutral good character is still good, willing to make some sort of personal sacrifice for the common good or for the good of the people that they don't know personally. Unless you're lawful, neutral good isn't any less good. So if we think about some pop culture examples, Spider-Man is neutral good. Santa Claus is neutral good.
Yeah, I mean, you can't be breaking into people's houses all the time and call yourself lawful.
Right, yeah, it's kind of creepy.
But, you know, for the greater good. So this is usually where I end up, in neutral good. My LARP character honestly started a bit south of here, but eventually noticed that he was making sacrifices for people who couldn't help him. Good and friendship and all that sort of thing that can be seductive, in the same way that evil can be. Eligio tends to go with the flow, and he's even sergeant of the militia. But he's always keeping his eyes open. He pays attention, he keeps notes, he knows the combination to that lock he sold you, just in case. And if the time comes for some skullduggery, he'll plan up something insane and steal your evil plans out from under you. Occasionally, he'll even explode a world leader with a pickle. Though I can't say he's happy about the chaos. He keeps wanting to rein it in and control what's going on, but sadly there's no reining it in once you've let the chaotics loose. And he's trying to come to peace with that. I'll let the system work if it's gonna, but no, I don't trust it. I've got faith in me, and you should too.
Oh, what a nice message. I like that. Let's talk about chaotic good. Like I already said, a chaotic good character is still good. They still care about people. They'll help where they can. But they're going to be willing to break the world in order to help people because they're not attached to the world order, the system. They know it might not work. They're going to do good because good is the right thing to do, regardless of what the system says, what the government says. If you need someone to lie for you, bring a chaotic good or neutral good character along for the ride.
So a couple examples from pop culture are Green Arrow. R2-D2 always strikes me as chaotic good, just sort of merrily causing trouble and saving the day. Malcolm Reynolds, you know, at least most of the time, you know, screw the system, but he's going to make sure the people are taken care of.
And if you're going to like assign an alignment on the Axis system to people in everyday life, I think most people see themselves as chaotic good. Not that they're like, oh, I'm chaotic good, but that is kind of the value system that they kind of attribute to themselves, even if they don't kind of live up to that all the time. And I'm not saying this is necessarily what they do. This is how they fantasize about themselves in a, you know, Walter Mitty type fashion. They, you know, when people daydream about themselves, they do that within the framework of them being the heroes and trying generally to do good. Although I guess sometimes people daydream about being Sith Lords. I don't know.
Right. But usually if somebody says, if I were braver, this is what I would be.
Exactly. My cousin, who is a Marine, always played fighters with this particular alignment until he found out he could etch a little bit more combat ability out of the Paladin. He was a bit of a power gamer.
Oath of freedom all the way.
I'm not saying that there is necessarily a tendency for power gamers to go towards lawful good alignment, although we could do a study. Don't know how to get grant money for that, but another reason to support us on Patreon.
Sure. So I've got this friend from the LARP. His name is Doxy, and he worships the gibbous moon. Now, the gibbous moon is all about living in the moment. This one time it came to our town crier in a dream, and it actually took over his body and made him write out a knighting ceremony for Doxy. This ceremony was read out at town meeting in front of the Margraves and the other nobles, and at the end, Doxy had to play the guy several silver, and that was also part of the announcement. So yeah, this guy's god basically came in and just hijacked town meeting because he could. And Doxy is very similar. He's the sort of guy who will add an extra step in the plan just because it's silly and wonderful. And he doesn't worry too much about whether we're trying to herd too many cats or whether it will actually work out. It's like, oh no, wouldn't it be funny if?
Right.
That's really what separates his chaotic good from my character's lawful good. He just isn't at all concerned about holding the reins. He lets him run and, generally has a lot of fun.
There you go. Well, that's the point, right?
Exactly.
Let's talk about lawful neutral. A lawful neutral character is lawful. The system works, and if the system does not work for you, then, well, it sucks to be you. Find your place in society like everybody else does, because the system cannot and should not wait for you.
So the classic examples for lawful neutral from pop culture are Judge Dredd, who's very much you broke the law, prepare to die, and Inspector Javert, who will chase you across continents and through several different assumed identities for, I guess, breaking your parole.
Dude, I have such a hard time with the lawful neutral alignment. It basically shamelessly self-promotes its own inflexibility as a virtue. And it's so antithetical to my own outlook on life. Not to say that I'm necessarily an incredibly flexible person. I'm a human, so I'm inflexible in all sorts of ways, both in ways that I'm aware of and unaware of, right?
Sure.
But when you have a type of systemic inflexibility that you see as a virtue, that's very strange to me. And I suppose if I really wanted to grow as a role player, I would probably create a character with a lawful neutral outlook. I honestly don't know if I've ever been part of a game, either as a player or as a game master, where a character has taken on this alignment. I've had very little exposure to this in-game. I don't know if that's just because of the company I keep as friends, or if it's just a challenging alignment.
I mean, I've taken oaths to be lawful neutral. This is part of my job as being part of the policing force at my LARP. And I am breaking oaths and messing everything up by making my own decisions about when I apply the law and when I don't. And I think that I'm making the world a better place, but there are certainly people who could disagree.
Who disagree, and that there's the conflict, the interaction makes the whole game worth playing. And look, I'm not saying that this is a garbage alignment that isn't worth playing. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is that personally, I have seen very little, if any of it, in the games that I have been part of or run. But when you think about characters that we just mentioned, in terms of just examples, Judge Dredd and Inspector Javert. I mean, Javert is the foil for the protagonist, Jean Valjean, in Les Miserables. And Judge Dredd, while perhaps not from the same caliber of literature that Victor Hugo is able to put together, he's still the protagonist in his own source material. So these characters absolutely can work. Maybe it's just harder, at least for me, to see them work in improvised campaign settings, or just a player who can really have their character interpret them in a meaningful way over time. But let's talk about true neutral.
So true neutral is a tricky one. This is sort of the place in the middle of the grid where if you're not good, if you're not lawful, if you're not evil, and you're not chaotic, you sort of just end up there. And so some characters are really there because they haven't chosen a side. And some of the characters are there very intentionally. So you have some very different characters in this box. But anyway, truly neutral characters don't care about people or systems. They will do what they want, what benefits them, and they won't go out of their way to screw you over. Some neutral characters will care intensely about the balance between forces. Usually these are druids or rangers, if you're talking D&D, who care a lot about, say, the balance between nature and civilization. Some others are simply trying to get through the day. Most peasants and background extras are just assumed to be true neutral if you don't have a reason to give them some other alignment. It's also important to note that, like all the alignments, everyone is assumed to care for their own people. If you've got a person who would move heaven and earth for their mom but doesn't care about strangers, they can still be true neutral.
There's a lot of possibility space here. So, I mean, if you think about Lando Calrissian, at least during Empire Strikes Back, at least in the middle of the film, think about Al Bundy from Married with Children, true neutral. Very different character from Lando.
Absolutely.
And you think about Mr. Bean, very different character from both Lando and Al Bundy, all true neutral.
At my LARP, we have this character named Ghosting. And what Ghosting wants, more than anything, is to connect with Lady Luck. And this is something which, for various reasons I won't go into here, his fellow Fortunites believe to be absolutely impossible. But despite that, he pursues that goal with a single-minded focus, heedless of red flags or cost. In general, he'll help out, and he'll toss some coin in whatever hat is being thrown around, but he's also sacrificed bandits he found on the road to Lady Luck, which is, very illegal. It's also darker, if not, outright evil. But he wants what he wants, and people weren't helping, so he doesn't really care how that affects anything else. Now, if Ghosting were willing to use darker methods, if he was willing to just hunt down random people, he'd be some stripe of evil. But I really kind of view him as just being lost. So there you go. We have a true neutral character who cares deeply about something.
And I'm really glad you said that, because in my experience, so many players don't quite understand that the true neutral alignment isn't about the fact that characters don't care. I've had players who play true neutral, and they would just constantly say to the other characters and other players, I'll do whatever you want to do, I'll go along with whatever.
Just no will.
And they just, the players play their characters as if the characters have absolutely no skin in the game.
Frankly, how do you become skilled at anything without will?
Exactly. And it's just not a realistic way to play. And I know, you have to be careful when you apply the word realistic to a fantasy world, but you are still trying to apply realism, right? Because you're trying to be, whether or not you're trying to play a human, you're playing an anthropomorphized creature, sentient being, and those beings, have certain wills, like, for the most part, they want to survive. For the most part, they want to see some sort of success and happiness and fulfillment and blah, blah, blah. And so
And everybody loves their mama.
Well, not everybody.
Not everybody, but, you can want things without being some sort of saint.
Right. Maybe everybody wants to love their mama. I don't know. Anyway, that's enough for another podcast, another time.
And maybe you're a psychiatrist.
Well, emotional support is important.
Right.
It's so important to play your characters as though they have skin in the game.
Right.
Otherwise, why are you playing it all? Like, if you really play your character like has no skin in the game, I just have to ask the player, is this really where you want to be? Is this where you want to be spending your free time? And if they say, oh, no, I really do, it's like, okay, well, let's have a conversation about how your character can actually contribute to the narrative, because they're not.
Mm-hmm.
It can be difficult to tease out, if the player really doesn't care or if they really believe this is how they should be played. But I don't think playing a neutral character or any character with no skin in the game does anything but frustrate other players.
And your DM, because your DM is trying constantly to upset you, to get your reaction out of you. And if there's no way to do that, yeah.
For me, I think neutral characters they just want to come out on top. And if that means they have to switch sides because the tides are shifting, then they switch sides. Because they don't want to be on the losing side.
Sure.
And they have no values that will keep them on the losing side if that's the way things are going, like, as opposed to a lawful good character who will go down with the ship. Mm-hmm. Or the kingdom or whatever.
Sure.
I think one of the most interesting narratives that can come out of neutral characters is when they shift from a neutral alignment to any other alignment because of something that happens either to them or to other characters. So let's go back and talk about Lando Calrissian for a moment, okay?
Sure.
In the middle of Empire Strikes Back, he really was true neutral. Han and Leia and Chewie and the droids come in, and Lando betrays them, and he says, "Oh, the Empire arrived just before you did. I had no choice. I'm sorry." So he betrays his old buddy Han Solo, which he doesn't feel great about.
But he's got to keep that city flying.
He's got to keep that city flying, and he doesn't want to be on the opposite end of Force choke, right? That's not ideal. And so he's willing to sell his friends out to save his own skin. But then, towards the end of the movie, he is willing, when he realizes that the Empire's going to screw him over anyway, then he's like, oh, well, maybe I'd still have a chance with Leia and Han and the gang. So he gets his troops together and frees them, and they go to the Millennium Falcon. He's still true neutral at this point. And then there's a firefight on the landing pad, right?
Right.
And he actually lays down covering fire and tells Leia to get on board the Falcon. She says, "Leia, go!" He's putting himself at risk. This is the beginning of his change, okay?
Right.
And then they get on the Falcon, they escape, and they fly away, and then Leia says, "Oh, I know Luke is back at Cloud City. We have to go back for him." And Lando says, No. What about those fighters? We can't go back. So now he's waffling, right? He's still true neutral. And then, Chewie growls at him. He says, all right, we'll go back. And so they go back, and and then the movie ends, essentially.
Right.
Then in Return of the Jedi, he is willing to go to Jabba's palace to go rescue Han Solo, risking his own life and limb. Now he's kind of shifted. Now he's more of a chaotic good character. He really is shifting out of his neutral alignment.
Right. Because that's a objectively stupid idea.
Right.
That a true neutral character would just say, "No, I'm out. You're paying how much? Yeah, not worth it.
I'm out. Not doing it." Yeah. If you guys survive, I'll meet you at the bar.
Right.
At the cantina in Mos Eisley or whatever. But he goes and he risks his life and limb. It's sort of it's a type of redemption for himself, right? To realize I really am more of a chaotic good character. And then, at the rest of the movie, he's part of the rebellion. He becomes a general. It's just got to be like a promotion factory, the rebellion. Oh, yeah. That's probably how they incentivize people to join, right? Like, oh, you can be a general. Like you once held a gun, you're a general. Why not?
Yeah, we lost 3 of those last week. We got to fill the ranks.
And you could say, oh, he just joined the rebellion because, they made him a general and this is something that works for him. He's still a true neutral. And I would say, yes, but during the Battle of Endor, he goes toe-to-toe with Admiral Akbar, basically saying, your strategy won't work. My strategy is the way to go. And that's what they go with. And he ends up being right.
Yeah.
Again, flying into the Death Star, risking life and limb. So he really does shift. Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful. It's wonderful. And so that's kind of my psychological assessment of the characterological change of Lando Calrissian as through the Dungeons & Dragons alignment axis. I never thought I'd be doing this in my life, but there you go.
There you go.
Let's talk about chaotic neutral.
So chaotic neutral characters really don't care about people all that much, and they feel constrained by rules. We talked earlier about the chaotic good folks who would steal the tax money to feed the orphans. This is the chap who steals the tax money to keep it, or who lies in business deals to get one over on you. Now, I've said before that neutral people don't care about people, and that's true. They won't go out of their way to help you at all. But a neutral character still has a moral center because they're not evil. There are things that they won't do. That person who finds you bleeding by the road and just wants no part of it might be chaotic neutral, but the one who goes through your pockets again and gives you a kick in the ribs is evil. It's the difference between this is not my problem and friend, I am your problem.
Examples from pop culture would be Captain Jack Sparrow, Flynn Rider, and I'd say the chaotic neutral alignment in characters in role-playing games, chaotic neutral is really kind of where I live. That's just me.
So you like to see things happen, and you're kind of in it for yourself, at least to begin with.
I'm in it for myself. I will help other people if it makes a good story.
Sure.
Basically, if it makes a good story that I can then sell down the road, I'm all in.
Oh, yeah. See, this is reminding me of a friend of mine, Corky. Corky's a local crime boss.
Yeah.
He'll run a heist for you if the pay is right, but he'll also check to make sure your goals aren't too destabilizing. Unlike Robin Hood, he doesn't require that his crimes actually help people, though if some good PR lands in his lap, he'll absolutely take that. But he is careful. In a world where magic and plots and weird artifacts can literally destroy the country, he takes some pains not to help anybody who's going to destroy the place he has to live in. And if he gets wind of that sort of a plot, he'll tell the cops.
Right.
Most importantly, though, Corky makes darn sure he gets paid. At the end of the day, that's what we're all here for.
We've got 3 to go. We're going to get through this. Let's talk about lawful evil characters.
All right.
So lawful evil characters are evil, which means they care about themselves, where the neutral character might take your coin, but because it's there and it's tempting, where an evil character sets out to get your coin from the get-go. It's part of their plan. Our lawful evil character believes in systems, believes in government, usually in systems and in government that put them above others. It works for them.
And if it doesn't, it will.
Right, yeah. If it doesn't, it will. They will make it. They will bend that law. They will use legal loopholes to buy your house out from under you, and they'll insist that it's fair because they're legalistic about it. Or they'll be running the country or town and merrily collecting whatever taxes they like because they have that power. They're unlikely to burn your village to the ground because it's a perfectly good village that they can extract resource from lawfully.
So, like all other alignments, evil comes in all sorts of scales. On the one hand, you have Darth Vader, who is just menacingly, hugely evil in a big way. On the other hand, you have Vogons, who are just sort of, they're following the rules, they don't care that they're bulldozing your planet, and they're bureaucrats. They're just evil little bureaucrats with bad poetry.
And then there's like the Sheriff of Nottingham, which is maybe between Darth Vader and Vogons, or maybe he's just Darth Vader without force powers and like complex trauma. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So I once ran a 2-year-long 12-player 3.5 edition D&D campaign. That's actually not quite true. I ran a year-long prequel campaign that was designed from the get-go to be a prequel, and I had 8 players, and people liked it so much that for the second year, the world leapt forward in time 200 years, and I did a second year-long campaign, and we went from 8 players to 12.
Word on that 8-player game must have spread.
Yeah, people actually really liked it. It was interesting because we played both synchronously and asynchronously in time with that many players. We had to, and I think I've talked about this campaign on the podcast before.
I think so, yeah.
But I bring it up now because one of the players was one of my best college buddies, Jonathan, who played a draconian named Phelan. And to be honest, Jonathan was kind of a power gamer of a kind. Actually, it's dramatic understatement. He was a hardcore power gamer. It was challenging to manage, but we made it work. This should have been a red flag, maybe not only in the game, but in life. He told me when we were designing this game, he said, I want to play D&D because I just want to kill things. And I'm like, okay, duly noted.
Gotcha.
But he wasn't just about getting power in the game over his fellow players. He actually played the lawful evil alignment really, really well.
That's great. That's so rare.
It's really rare. He was really like, I'm going to create a system that I believe is objectively correct, and oh, by the way, it completely benefits me and kind of craps on other people, and that's just the way it's going to be, and might makes right, and I have the power, so either get on board or, again, sucks to be you. The other players did not like this, but because Jonathan understood this alignment so well and played it perfectly in my mind, I kind of fostered that and said to the other players, hey, if you don't like what this player is doing, you can gang up against him, which I know is kind of frowned upon in a lot of co-op role-playing games, but with my particular mix of players, I knew this would work. And so they ganged up against him.
And the great thing is with 12 players, you can lose a few.
Right. It's not ideal, but yeah, you can. I didn't, though. I kept all 12 players engaged, and they kept each other engaged, certainly not. These other players kind of ganged up against Jonathan, and his philosophy was bring it on, and it worked. It was great.
Neutral evil. So a neutral evil character is out for themselves. like most neutral folks, they kind of try to stay out of trouble. They do the lawful thing most of the time, but if they see a safe way to ruin you and put money in their pocket, they'll do that. They really don't feel comfortable with or constrained by social systems. They'll use any protections that are available to them, but they'll merrily break their promises and screw you out of your protections. They generally won't try and set up a system to bring you down because they don't worry about being consistent. They are, again, opportunists. They'll take what you don't nail down.
So we're talking about like Agent Smith from The Matrix, and Voldemort from Harry Potter.
So it's tricky for me as I'm in a LARP rather than generally playing D&D. And players tend not to describe themselves as neutral evil for good reasons. But I do have my theories about this one fellow at the LARP. This guy is currently supporting the main villain of the piece. He's trading heavily enough with this guy to effectively be bankrolling the whole plan. But he'll work with the town too, and he'll insist that he's just trying to mitigate the damage that this Gregory is causing. I'm doing everything I can, he says, but the ships keep sailing fully laden with trade goods to come back and kill us all. This is a character who's pretty clearly out for himself. He's willing to put up a show of support for the light, but he's heavily hedging his bets in case the bad guy wins. And he's lining his pockets in the process. Even if the bad guy goes down, he'll have massive amounts of money. I peg him at neutral evil because he isn't trying really to destroy the system or build his own system. He's just looking out for number one all the way. Out of game, I want to be clear that there's nothing wrong with that. Just as there's nothing wrong with what I'm going to have to do to his character. You need to, especially if you're playing with the whole gamut of alignments, you need to be able and willing to have beef with somebody in game, but be okay with them out of game.
Yeah, you put it down and you walk away. And if you have a hard time with that transition, there's probably something for your gaming group to process. And that can be okay, too. Not always comfortable, necessarily, but people conflate uncomfortable with bad, and that's not necessarily true. Something can be uncomfortable to process, including beef you have with another player, and that's an okay conversation to have. It's a necessary conversation to have. It doesn't have to be this weird, stigmatized thing.
Right.
Okay. Chaotic evil, last but not least. Chaotic evil. And I think chaotic evil is the alignment that kind of makes it outside of RPG gamer circles, and is certainly not like a household term, but definitely makes it into, pop culture because it's seen as, an extreme and dramatic. And it is extreme and dramatic, but all of these alignments can be dramatic if played right. So chaotic evil characters don't care about other people, and they certainly don't feel constrained by social system. If you try and tell a chaotic evil character what to do, either in terms of morality or lawful behavior or anything else, they might laugh and give you a hug, or they might just stab you if they feel like they can get away with it, or even if they don't feel like they can get away with it, and, they're just thinking moment to moment. Chaotic evil folks are, in some ways, incapable of following laws, but not really. They're perfectly happy to pay for their own lunch because that's not necessarily the battle that they want to fight that particular day or that particular moment. It's really just kind of a preference.
They're not that predictable where you can say, oh, here's a one-way sign and we know they'll go the wrong way. They still have free will.
And they might go the right way, and they're like, hey, we're going the right way because it's the right way. There's a one-way sign. Let's go that way.
Right.
If they go the wrong way down the next one way, be like, hey, the sign says the other way. And they're like, yeah, and? Why are you telling me that?
Yeah. So you see chaotic evil characters a lot.
Yep.
A lot of them don't get a lot of characterization, but some that do is the Joker.
Yep.
And Bellatrix Lestrange from Harry Potter. Just very burn the world, I like to see it suffer type of people.
Or not, depending on what they're feeling at that moment.
Yeah.
Oh, I think chaotic evil characters are a lot of work. I think I mentioned this earlier. They just, if they get a lot of time with the microphone, it's just an emotional task.
Yeah.
A lot of emotional energy required to maintain the chaotic evil persona. But because chaotic evil is seen as such an extreme and people feel like they need to ham it up, it does come with a certain lack of flexibility because there's this need to always be chaotic. which can make role-playing interesting, but you need to do it in a way that's sustainable, that won't exhaust you or your other players, because you can do that quite easily.
And chaotic evil is where we come to my thoughts on my LARP's big bad, Gregory. This creature is an immortal, body-hopping mentalist who's just learned a new trick. He learned that vast power can be amassed in the void if one is able to consolidate a large enough ordered presence there. Mind magic, which he's good at, is apparently pretty good at imposing order in there, but it's even easier to throw existing order into the void and then prevent it from falling apart. So that's what he's doing. He's stealing cities and people, and he's throwing them into the void, and he's using mentalism to cobble them together into what is essentially his own miniature plane. Now you notice that he's doing a lot of ordered things, but I still peg him as chaotic evil because despite the fact that he's trying to create an order, his whole plan is basically based on personal power. If he goes down, it all falls apart. And his mental control directly imposes everything that he holds. And I don't care how many bodies you're using, it's not orderly cooperation if yours is the only mind that matters. Also, the stealing pieces of the landscape thing doesn't really scream lawful to me.
Okay. We made it through all 9 alignments on the Axis system. So
We did, but we actually have something we want to say new for ourselves now.
is it new? I don't know. We'll put it out there and see what people say.
Sure.
I'm not saying that all game groups or all players or all DMs use this system as a straitjacket, but it's definitely set up to be a straitjacket. The idea that people always act in accordance with their values is certainly not in line with what we know of social psychology. It's hard, and it's just not realistic, just because so often acting in accordance with your values flies in the face of evolutionary drives, like survival.
Yeah. I would give a lot to always act in accordance with my values. It's hard.
I think alignment can serve as a great framework, but it should really be seen, I think, as aspirational. You aspire to be lawful good, you aspire to be chaotic evil, but not seen as a rigid framework to dictate how characters act. Players will break character and say, oh, I can't do that. It's not part of my alignment. My character wouldn't do that. Whenever I see that, I get frustrated, and part of my heart breaks because I'm like, oh, you're missing out on such a potentially rich role-playing, story-building opportunity here.
And you're so close. Don't throw away the temptation just because it's temptation. Temptation is great.
Right. Yeah. Like that's where the story lives, right? You think about any story you've ever read or watched or whatever, like that's where the conflict is. That's what makes it worthwhile. And so when you throw that away because you are so stuck in your rigid framework, I mean, it's just, the world just falls apart. I mean, you may just like lay out all of the do's and don'ts in a reference table at that point and be like, oh, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that, I will do this. And there's no need for a player at that point, ultimately. Sure, you're neutral and you're good. There's a complication to the plan, but you bail on it. You give up on the people you're trying to help, and there's the story, right?
Absolutely. It's something that's maybe within your alignment. It's not a easy rejection, right? It's not, oh, you're neutral good, now sacrifice this baby. No. It's something you're tempted to do, and it gives you a direction. And there are so many other directions you can go with that.
When people act incongruently with their value system, either because survival dictates it or because opportunity encourages it, or simply because they're burned out and they're questioning their values. When your worldview is ripped apart and you have to reassemble it, and you don't always know what that new worldview is going to look like because of grief or loss or whatever. Like that's where the juice of the role-playing game is. Mm-hmm. And where that can be very painful and awful in real life, like it's those moments in life where we're like, oh, this is good character building stuff, and it's correct to some extent, right? If people can build back from that, and so we go through that in life for the most part because we have to, but we shy away from it so often in role-playing games because we don't have to, because we can break character and be like, oh, my character won't do that. Mm-hmm. And that's the exact wrong thing to do. Like steer into the struggle and have that character building experience when your character is acting incongruently with their alignment, because that will just add, so, like I said, so much just juiciness to the story.
Absolutely. And if you manage to come out with your alignment intact after an honest struggle with it, it's so much more meaningful. So if you're trying to run a game with this sort of classical alignment, with law and chaos and good and evil being the guiding forces of your world, you want to make sure to aim for the cracks in this philosophy. Make sure that, for example, the laws aren't always fair. You need to make sure that there's a tension sometimes between being lawful and being good. So having laws which aren't flat out evil, but say unfairly harsh to this particular thief, can be really helpful. It's also good to have laws which are just impractical. Like, for instance, you can't investigate the mayor's house until you prove he's a lich. And obviously you can't prove he's a lich until you can investigate him. It's not an immoral law, it's just bureaucratic and unworkable. But really there's some value in sort of abandoning law and chaos and good and evil altogether.
We've been talking about this axis alignment system, which is kind of a grandfather that came out of Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s and was developed over time. And this is the giant, right? And if we are talking about doing something different, we are standing on the shoulders of that particular giant. And I think, given the development and evolution of role-playing games, this giant, by and large, is outdated. We kind of have already said that. Mm-hmm. I mean, when alignment is really looking at values and goals and developmental history and talking about the differences between values and goals, and values and goals really are different, right? A value is something that is ongoing. It's like, I want to be a good person. I want to be a, good brother or good sister or whatever. I want,
Absolutely.
Where a goal is something that is time limited. It has an end date. Like, I want to run a marathon. And you might succeed or you might fail in that goal. Or a more specific goal would be like, I want to run a marathon in under 3 hours. And you run the marathon and you succeed or fail. And you can try again if you fail, or succeed, whatever. But succeed or fail at that particular goal, that doesn't terminate your value. So just a basic difference between goals and values, but both play into alignment for characters in a role-playing game.
Absolutely. You also have this question of power and direction. You have values that make you stronger, believing in hard work, believing in that sort of thing. And then you have values that direct you in a certain way, being charitable, being kind. And they're very different in the character that they led to your character.
You can also think about it as two characters in a game can have the same goal, but because they have different values, they're going to how to approach achieving that goal in radically different ways. And there's the stuff of story.
Exactly. And that's what a foil is, right? It's
yeah,
generally two characters with the same goal who have different values about how they're going to achieve it, and how does that play out. So, how do we access the positives of alignment and get that shorthand that we need without forcing everyone into the same boxes? And I think it's good to look at druids and rangers who, in stereotypical alignment, they stick right in true neutral, but they have this other axis that sort of isn't on the map. They believe in a balance between civilization and nature. Sometimes they don't believe in a balance at all and think that nature should just be the only thing. And you can do that for other classes and other characters and other people. You can make a wizard that believes that the accumulation of arcane knowledge really trumps everything else. Or you can make that wizard believe that it's a important step on their tier list. Maybe they think the most important thing is to protect actual lives of people living now. And then after, we worry about acquiring arcane knowledge, which is still very important. And then I guess after that, once we've got the knowledge, we'll worry about laws and property and, future situations. And
I think it's also really beneficial to tap into some very basic psychology constructs when we're talking about how now shall we run our characters if we're not using the alignment axis. So think about state versus trait, right? Classic alignment rules put much more of an emphasis on traits rather than states. Very briefly to define them, a state is basically a psychological construct, a way of being that is fairly stable over time, such as intelligence. Your intelligence doesn't fluctuate radically from one day to the next or even 1 year to the next. Your level of intelligence is fairly fixed over time. That's a state. That's a trait. But a state is something that fluctuates much more frequently, is more labile. So your mood, your emotional state, for example, if Doug at work calls you a cartoon face and how you have big clown feet, you'll be like, wow, Doug, you pissed me off. You're kind of a jerk. And you go home and you pour yourself a glass of wine and you're like, Doug stinks. I hate Doug. And then, you won't stay angry at Doug, but you're tired and you go to bed and you wake up and you're like, oh, Doug's not a bad guy. There are certain types of anger that can stay constant over time, but we're talking about like the type of anger or joy, sadness, happiness that take a lot of emotional energy, and those aren't things that you can sustain for more than a few hours. Those are states that shift.
And those are going to affect your actions, but doesn't necessarily make any sense to put them on your character sheet because they'll be gone before the ink's dry.
Exactly. But they do determine your actions moment to moment than your stable traits do.
That's the reason you punch Doug.
You punch him with your witty banter, or are we actually punching Doug?
I mean, it depends what world we're in, but
Fantasy world Doug. Fantasy world violence is fine.
Yeah.
Although you have to be careful about how much violence you put in your game, or else your other players might turn to you and say, are you a bad person? And then you really will want to punch them, but you can't. So again, sangria is good for that.
Good tip.
My proposal, Rick, for figuring out how characters are most likely to behave rather than using an alignment axis is, just determining how your character acts, reacts, interacts in your game world. Have a list of 5 things that your character cares about the most in order of priority. That could be like, I care about my cat, my dog, my family, my sister, my job, my sword, whatever. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. The things that you care about the most. And when those things are in danger, when you're in a situation where caring about those things applies, you're going to behave in such a way as to keep those things out of danger or harm or whatever, right?
That sort of a list can give your DM something to work with, something to engage your character on without answering the question that no one asked of, is your wizard lawful or chaotic? And again, this isn't a straitjacket, but it means that if you come to a decision point and you're not sure how to act, this is a guide.
This is a guide, right, yeah.
And if you feel like it's wrong, absolutely act against it. But if you're not sure and you're trying to break yourself out of analysis paralysis, very helpful.
Right. So let's say of those 5 things that you care about the most, top of the list is protecting your little sister, making sure she's okay. Number 2 is don't kill people. But if your sister is in danger, you might kill people to protect your little sister, and drama ensues, and that's worth role-playing out, right? After there are these 5 things, and it doesn't have to be 5, it can be 3, it can be 7, it could be 20, but that's going to be a lot of work to keep track of on paper. Then you have 3 goals, like these are the things I want to achieve. And then you have 3 values, these are kind of how I conduct myself. Then you have 3 traits. Then you have the most common states that you're a part of, right? And you kind of have this hierarchy of, like this is how you're going to behave when you're in a context where that applies. And if it doesn't apply, kind of go down to the next thing on the list. And just remembering that for you as a human being, as a player, just as for your character, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior.
But it doesn't always decide what's going on. Again, as we were talking about earlier, Lando's alignment changed, and that was a beautiful thing. So that brings up the question, what do you do if you start feeling like it's time for your character's alignment to change? And I believe that if you get to that question, it probably already has changed.
Maybe, but I'm with you. I'm with you.
A sincere desire to be different from what you are changes who you are. Now, you have to be careful with this because if you look at the old grid system, your alignment decides what afterlife you go to, et cetera, et cetera. And it's important to sort of divorce those things. Your history is still going to be very important when you're trying to determine how people or other entities treat you. If you just decided that you were going to turn over a new leaf, you might still end up thrown up thrown in hell, and you might still deserve it. But in my book, you should really change your alignment as soon as you feel the urge to. I see it as kind of a conversation between you and your DM. You're telling them where you're planning to go as a character and where they need to put up roadblocks in order to make that journey interesting. So if your character used to be conflicted about the tension between free access to information and the importance of the Dewey Decimal System, seeing how it's nigh impossible to maintain proper organizational rigor with people touching everything all the time, if that used to be important to you, but now you don't care if people can read as long as it's organized, tell your DM that. Tell them immediately. That way they can throw in a conflict that's actually going to excite you rather than something you've solved.
And look, yes, if you want to talk to your dungeon master or game master or fellow players about an alignment shift, if you're using an alignment system, fine, go for it. More power to you. I'm not going to yuck your yum. But if I were to sum up everything we're talking about in the past hour, I would really say that alignment really should be a reflection of your character's behavior, not a way of dictating the behaviors of your character. So if you really want to just shift your alignment, you don't need to say, hey, I'm going to be, I'm going to be neutral rather than lawful good. Just change what your character is doing. And if you get pushback, be
start going off script.
Go off script, right? And yes, you should have a good reason for it because behavioral change is hard and difficult and rare.
But if you just found out that guy killed your father, change how you're acting.
Yeah. And then you can say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna be this different alignment now because that's a reflection of how my character is acting. Okay, so we could talk about alignment for years. People have, right?
But I think we more or less covered the basics. And I think the fact that you can create your own boxes instead of relying on Gary Gygax's adds a lot of flexibility and flavor without sacrificing the structure that is needed for your DM to be able to work with your character.
So that's pretty much it for us, I think, in this particular episode. It's kind of sometimes we like to end our episodes on okay. And I think we've done that pretty well.
Yeah, I think we've nailed it.
Please do like and subscribe. Please, please, please like and subscribe to our podcast. Share our podcast. That helps us the most, as well as our other content. Check out our website at corexandcoffee.com.
And tune in next week, because next week we'll be airing the Season 2 finale of Corex and Coffee Cast. Please consider supporting us on Patreon or through our merch store. We got some really good stuff in there.
After the Season 2 finale, we're going to take a break, play some games. We will be posting other content, and then we'll be back for Season 3. I'm your host, Pete Steele.
And I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks.
We would love to see you at the gaming table soon. Until next time, take care.
Take care. Goodbye.
For the record, I'm chaotic neutral. Famous chaotic neutrals include Professor Farnsworth, Moriarty, Deadpool, and Flame Princess. I'm sure there's some Rick and Morty ones or South Park options, but to be honest with you, I'm pretty tired of those fandoms. And Deadpool is hanging on by a thread. You know what you did. Anyway, your heroes, villains, randos, murder hobos? Who knows? Alignment is tricky. Anyway, they're named Pete Steele and Rick Hendricks. Both of them are lawful neutral. Regardless of whether or not this is true, now it's on the internet forever. Music, production, and general tomfoolery brought to you by me, Keegan King. Sometimes people support us from the background. Those people are truly amazing and probably true neutral. Do you want to be one of those people? Well, feel free to join our Patreon or check out our other content on coraxandcoffee.com. We've got reviews, previews, high chews. Well, I have high chews, but I'll share them with you. For those of you who don't know, it's a fun gummy. Anyway, please rate and review us prior to any candy-related sharing. Otherwise, it might be extortion, or at least bribery. The quote of the week. Look at me, I'm terrible at giving advice. I have no moral conscience whatsoever. If you don't do this for me, do it for your stupid friends out there. Because trust me, they're completely lost without you. Corax and Coffee. Tabletop gaming, caffeinated.